Good morning. A pleasant morning to one and all. I hope I'm audible. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can
Yes,
hear you.
ma'am.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Um, at the outset, let me thank the principal, Dr. Roy George, HOD, Dr. Tom Thomas, and Febu George, the convener, for giving me this opportunity and extending this warm invitation whereby I could come and interact with the research scholars of St. Thomas College, as well as the other enthusiastic UG and postgraduate students. It's indeed been a very humbling moment, as well as something that I deem it as an honor, because for the warm words that Febu has rendered, as well as everyone, I share a very uh, happy relationship with Febu, because something which over the years, we haven't spoken over the years, but it is very clearly indicative of the idea that, we have had some good interactions and some good associations in the University Institute of English. So thank you at the outset itself, Febu, for extending this opportunity to me. And the task for rendering this keynote address and for the research forum, it's indeed a very noble idea that you have a research forum in your college, because normally when people talk about research, the first thing that I get to see is that frowning on the faces, or people trying to say, "Oh my God, research is a Herculean task." But the moment you start immersing yourself in that experience, you realize that you enjoy every bit of it. And it is not that we keep looking at, when will this entire task be over? Rather, you start enjoying the process itself. So that is where the research forum comes into play, because we also have these kind of research bodies, research clubs, journal clubs, all of these in our campus as well. I'm talking about Christ at Bangalore. So where we have students coming and making their presentations. When they have read about a new topic, they come and present that in front of their classmates and the faculty members. Or if they have come across a new paper, or if they have come across a new idea which they want to discuss, or they invite people. So what happens is that there is a lot of sharing that happens, and that space becomes a very vibrant space in terms of ideating, debating, conflicting with other ideas, all of this. But ultimately, there is always a resolution. Now, this resolution is something which, in a later point of time, they might contradict as well. But still, there is that flow of ideas that happens, and that is where a research forum becomes extremely relevant. So I am extremely happy that the college has taken this kind of an initiative, which will be a space where UG, postgraduate, and research scholars can together come forward and think about possibilities of even collaborating. Because normally we say, is research only for the research scholars? No. We do extend it to now to the UG, the postgraduate students, all of those spaces. So how do we look at collaboration? Because collaboration is the buzzword now in research. Everybody talks about collaborating across disciplines. They talk about collaborating, in terms of within the department, outside the department. That is the buzzword. Because we ourselves have been having workshops where we were given ideas as to how do we collaborate both in the university, outside the university, building our networks, all of those. And the focus of all these discussions ultimately comes to research. So the last and the final word, as well as the starting word, is always research. So what is research and how do we take it forward? And the principal has very clearly set the tone by talking about a very important term, that is lateral thinking. And it is lateral thinking that becomes important for us to understand the diverse possibilities that are there in the term research itself. And in fact, I remember when we used to have research discussions, there was one quote which I always keep, in my mind. That is the quote which says, research is to see what everybody else has seen and to think what nobody else has thought. So it is not about saying that, research has to be original in the sense, that's completely new. Nobody has talked about it, all of those. No. So how do we understand what is new in research? But still the research has to be new. So what is new in that research? At the same time, you say that the research is connected as well. So how do we negotiate with all of this? So I hope today's session, I am able to share my ideas with you, as well as whatever practices and ideologies that we have been discussing for years, and how I can open some new, what you call as, thoughts, which it has been discussed a lot of late with regard to the possibilities, the problems, how do you circumvent all of those. So I've been told that the discussions will happen towards the end of the session, but in case there is something that you would like to contribute at a moment, and you feel that it is imminent, that it has to be discussed then and there, please feel free to let me know. And at the outset, once again, I wish all the best and a bright future to all the research scholars out here, and as well as a fruitful space that Research Forum opens for all the scholars and teachers and students, so that it becomes one vibrant research hub. Without delay, I will start with what I have been asked to talk about and discuss with you. Please keep in your mind that this is not something which is new, which you haven't heard. This is what you would have heard at different points of time. It's just that I'm trying to put it in a perspective that I think will help you understand the nitty-gritty, as well as take it forward the way you are comfortable in terms of making your permutations and combinations. So I have a small PPT with me, but do not feel bogged by the word PPT. I have tried to keep it as indicative as possible, just to ensure that, we streamline our thoughts based on what I am trying to present out here. Okay, so just a second, please. Okay, is my slide visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Online space is one particular space where you cannot, judge by looking at people's faces. You don't get that spot on reaction. So you keep asking. So please bear with me if I keep on asking, are you with me? Are you following me? Please do let me know, because this has come over this 1 year's time, and that is what pandemic has done. Okay. Now, if I may contextualize a little further, Sir was talking about the pandemic, and he was talking about how the English department is exploring new horizons to take their research forward. Now, in fact, that can become a starting point for research. How the pandemic is opening up, a new realm for you. So the pandemic can be both a boon and a bane. How do you do those kind of research possibilities in humanities? What is it that the pandemic is offering you? Okay. And what is it that you feel is getting curtailed, and how do you find your way out of all of these? So that is also a research possibility. So please do give it a thought as well. So the title of my talk is Decoding Research, Perspectives, Problems, and Possibilities. I've been very well briefed by Febu that, we have UG, PG, and research scholars. So I have tried to keep my presentation such a manner that I can relate to all the three groups who are here, as well as the faculty members. Please feel free to put in your suggestions, which will enrich what I am trying to present as well. So without further delay, I go ahead. When we talk about research itself, what comes to your mind? Normally, what I do in a classroom, but sorry, because this happens to be, a space where a time is allotted. I cannot do that right now. Otherwise, I would have done that. We use the Mentimeter, and I tell them, when I say the word research, that's what I do in my first class. I handle research methodology classes. So when I start my first class, I tell them, if it had been an offline class, I tell them, okay, people, tell me what comes to your mind the moment I say research. So then there is a brainstorming session that happens, and they keep on throwing words one after the other, and I write it down on the board out there, and it becomes a huge pool of words out there. Okay, so last year and this year, what I tried was with the Mentimeter, and there again, I got a lot of details as well. Okay, so research comes with a lot of words which find relevance, the way in which they are positioned and the way you understand them and how you take it forward. Now, when we talk about research, the first idea that comes is investigation. Okay, you are investigating, you are probing, you are examining something. Now, what are you trying to investigate? You are trying to investigate to explore the materials, the resources out there, then whatever other factual details are there for you, all of those you are exploring. Okay, so you're investigating and then you are exploring, and all of these lead to what we call establishing certain conclusions or findings. Okay, certain conclusions or finding. Now, why have I put there creative and strategic? Because normally when we talk about research, I have never come across people immediately using the word creative, but I have come across the word strategic. I have come across the word rational, reasoning, logical. All of these words are there, but not the word creative. But if you look into research, what you require is a happy commingling or a coexistence of both creative and the strategic, because you need to have a plan in mind. You need to have a clear kind of reasoning as to why you are doing a research in a particular manner, why are you choosing a topic, why it becomes relevant, all of those. You need to have your rationale very clear. At the same time, you should be creative enough to be flexible. You should be creative enough to, position yourself within the box while think out of the box as well. So there has to be what we call the right brain and the left brain working together to help you understand that research is not just hardcore facts out there, just listing or an inventory of hardcore facts, and that is it, and then the research is done. But research is one where you blend these two together, and that gives you a different perspective altogether. So I come to an important aspect, that is the construct of research. Now, why do I call research as a construct? Okay. Why do I call research as a construct? And I want to position two ideas for you very clearly out here, two basic, ideologies which have been popular at a point of time, and one which is still popular as well. Okay. One is what we call positivism, and another one is what we call as post-positivism. Now, that will also explain why am I using the term constructive research. Okay, as they mentioned at the beginning, I am a person who is interested in audio visual text a lot, so you would find a lot of visuals in my presentation because I tend to think a lot more in terms of the visual aspect. Okay, so hope that you will be able to synchronize your thoughts along those lines as well. Okay. Now, when I say something is a construct, when something is a construct, meaning you know that it has been put together. Okay, you know it has been put together. So in research realm as well, there were two major streams at a point of time. The first stream which existed was positivism. Now, what happened with positivism was you had your natural sciences like chemistry, biology, physics, and all of those. What happens in those natural sciences? You establish your ideas very clear. There is one answer, there is one noble reality, and there is nothing like ambiguity out there. You have a single answer, and that holds valid. If my memory is still correct, pi is equal to 22 by 7, right? 22 by 7, or what we call E is equal to mc square. These are formulae which come to my mind when I try to think about what I've done in my science classes at school. So these are things which hold valid. A simple reason, like when we say water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. When you have all your variables constant, okay, and the temperature maintained at that, water will definitely boil no matter where the context is. Okay. So positivism clearly talked about one reality, one answer, deductive kind of understanding. Okay. Deductive kind of understanding. So you are very clearly positioning the researcher as a detached observer. Researcher does not interact. In your chemistry labs, in your school days, I'm sure when you were mixing up the chemicals, it does not depend upon your mood, right? How the chemicals react. It depends upon the proportion, the temperature, all of those. So you are just a detached observer out there. Your thoughts, your feelings will not make the chemicals react faster or react lesser. Okay. So that was something which was very, very typical of what we call as positivism or something connected to natural sciences. So an answer is clearly established. Now, what happened was that over a period of time, you have other fields coming in humanities, social sciences, all of these. Okay. What happened in these particular fields was that somebody would have done research for 5 years or let's say 4 years or whatsoever. They have done research, they have studied certain texts, they have come up with certain kinds of what you call as theoretical propositions, and they have established certain conclusions. What happens is that they have published their results, and within another 4 to 5 years somebody comes and contradicts what they have published or extends it to a different realm altogether. That is when they understood that what I have done 5 years before and I have established as sacrosanct, I find now somebody else taking it forward in a different line altogether. To put in perspective, a simple example, all of you are familiar with Jane Eyre, the novel, right? All of you are familiar with Jane Eyre. Now, the moment I say Jane Eyre, the first character that comes to your mind is Jane itself, right? Jane Eyre. Then you have Mr. Rochester and other characters, okay? Now, years later, people started talking about, with the post-colonial understanding and all of that, people started talking about Bertha Mason. Okay, Bertha Mason, and then people started associating with different ways in which Bertha Mason can be looked at as a character, a specific important character in the novel itself. So, how are we looking at all of these? Or what has been said at a point of time? A very classic example is there was a time when we talk about structuralist approach, and now we have moved on to a post-structuralist approach. So, how are you looking at these things? So that is where post-positivism comes into play, saying that you do not talk about one reality, rather you talk about multiple realities. You talk about what you call ambiguities. You talk about the researcher being a participant. So when I am reading a novel, I might be interested in a few things. When I hand over the book to you, somebody else might read it in some other manner. I'm sure all of you have heard about Roland Barthes and the death of the author and all of those, right? So post-positivism was clearly opening up the entire space which was constricted. Okay. So people started understanding that research is flexible. Research can be inductive. It can be inductive in nature. And research is not like pinned to one single dimension. So the world outside your space is not a knowable world. Like science said, all the mysteries in the world can be sorted out. But with post-positivism, you are clearly saying that there are mysteries outside our realm, which we might not be able to understand as well. So you are accepting the, what you call the ambiguities, you are accepting the doubts, the confusions, the contradictions, everything you're factoring all of that into your research. Okay. And that is why a wall which has been built, and like how you say, you talk about the Titanic or whatsoever, the wall which has been built, it can be, raised to the ground at any point of time, and a new wall can be built again. Okay. Now that brings me to an important term out here, and that is, why do I say research? Okay. Please do not think about research as what you call, new, original, not heard of so far. No. Rather, think about research as researching. what has been already there, when you think about it further, it's not that, you are going to find something and then you would run across the streets and you say, Eureka moment, I have seen something which nobody has seen. No, we're not talking along those lines. Rather, that is those kind of things we talk about within the realm of your natural sciences. Here, we are talking about a perspective. We are talking about a point of view. So here we are talking about thinking through things. So one particular novel or a painting or a photograph, if I hand it over to 10 students and 10 of them can read it in 10 different ways. Somebody can approach it from a very clear, what you call a textual kind of analysis. Somebody can do for me a postmodern reading. Somebody can do a very thematic kind of analysis. Somebody can just understand the symbols in that. Somebody might be very much fascinated with the language that is used out there. So it keeps on changing. And with every perspective that you bring in, your research gives a completely different kind of an answer. So like water boiling at 100 degrees Celsius, wherever in the world, when you keep your variables X, Y, Z constant, it does not happen so in positivism, post-positivism. I'm sorry. So it does not happen that way in post-positivism. So what happens is that you are saying that a person who is reading, the person who is reading the novel Jane Eyre, okay, in India might respond to it in a different manner as against somebody who is reading it in US or any other context. Likewise, a person who has read it in the, couple of decades ago might respond it completely different from person who might read it again, let's say another 50 years later. So context, time, space, all of these things are bound to change the way you perceive. Now, why am I emphasizing this for you? Because I want you as researchers to bring in that flexibility into your thought. Bring in that flexibility as much as you bring in the rigor. Bring in kind of what you call as, willingness to accommodate. Bring in that openness, I always remember my research guide, Dr. Jayashree. So ma'am used to keep on telling us, have an open mind. Have an open mind. So don't think only along one direction. Ma'am used to keep telling us, have an open mind. Think about the other possibilities that are there in approaching. So that is what I want you also to take forward when you are thinking about research. What are the possibilities out there? Now, there was a time when I heard somebody come and tell us in a forum that, a student was presenting a paper. She said, Shakespeare is done to death. And everybody was shocked. Every now and then there is something new that we talk about Shakespeare. There is something different that's coming up as well. So you can't say something is done to death. So there are new avenues coming up. It depends upon how you see that entire possibility. Now, when you start, so let's think about getting started with our entire idea. When we start our research, what happens to be the starting point of any research? When I do my research methodology class at Christ, what I tell them is that take 1 week's time, look at everything around you, observe everything that you do, observe everything that you read or you focus on and all of those, and write down whatever questions come to your mind. Whatever questions come to your mind, just keep doing that and get back to me after a week's time. I tell them to do that. And then I say, after a week's time, people go through the questions that you have written. Go through the questions that you have written. From that, sieve and, sift, and then you take out the questions which you think you would like to take further or possible researchable questions. From that, narrow down to 5, narrow down to 3, finally narrow down to 1 question which you think. There might be students who might come and say, I'm interested in these 2 questions. What do I do? And I tell them, you tell me the question that you are extremely interested in knowing more about. So every research starts with a question. You want an answer to a question. You want an answer to a question, and that is where a research starts. Why is a character shown in a particular manner? Why is it that this particular writer, like for instance, Alice Walker's Color Purple, why does she use that particular kind of writing style, in terms of the letters and all of those? Why does she do that? Okay. Or why do you find Faulkner's writing where you have the beginning part at the end, you have the end at the middle, and you have a very haphazard kind of way? If you have read Sound and Fury, you would understand how you make sense of the entire novel. So why this kind of a writing? Or Gabriel Garcia Marquez in terms of his usage of full stops. Okay, so why all of this? So these are questions which come to your mind and you want to know what is the answer to these questions. And that is where your research starts. And once you have your questions in mind, I still remember one of my students came forward to me and said, "Ma'am, this is not a researchable question, but I'm interested in knowing." I said, "Okay, fine. Tell me." She said, "Nothing connected to what I'm going to do my research on." I said, "Okay, fine. Now I'm all the more curious. I want to know what your research is." So she kept on giving me the introduction till finally I was like, "Come on, can you now let the cat out the bag? Because I want to know what is it that you are thinking about." And then she gives me that $1 million question which was there in her mind, and she said, "Ma'am, why is the idli always round in shape?" And I was like, "Okay, wonderful." So that's a fabulous question. She said, "Why is it that we have in this particular sheet?" And that is when somebody came forward and said, "No, no, right now I have also come across a steamer where they have square shape and they have those kind of idli plates as well." And she's like, "Okay, then I don't think there is a possibility of research in that." So, you start thinking about all the things and you narrow down to what you see around you. So when you start with something, for instance, please pardon me if I bring in more examples from films, because that is an area which is very, very close to my heart. It's not that, I don't teach literature and all, but I'm more enthusiastic about films. Now, when I watch a particular film, I'll give you an example. You have had a spate of films in Malayalam cinema, like Ustad Hotel, Salt and Pepper, all of these films, right? People, have you all watched that? Have you all
Yes,
watched
ma'am.
these films? Yeah, you have watched those. Okay. So why all of a sudden food was becoming a very important aspect? Likewise, Angamali Diaries, the way they were talking about food and, the cooking of pork, cutting of pork, everything, and mixing it with, immediately mixing it with another scene of violence and all of those. So food, what is it all of a sudden that, you're talking about this kind of, representations of food, and what does food then serve as? So when you look further into it, you understand that food becomes a metaphor. It becomes a very important metaphor in terms of establishing associations, establishing identities, contesting identities, all of these. So that started with that question. If you remember Salt and Pepper, I think the opening lines, or Ustad Hotel, I think the opening title song has a collage, a montage of those kind of, shots of the food. Likewise in Angamali Diaries as well. So why all of a sudden this kind of an obsession with these kind of images? And that is when, when I started looking further into it, I explored that there is an area called as food pornography. Food pornography. Now, what is it all about? You are actually luring the people with these kind of delectable kind of, images of food. So you start thinking about it. Why are they using it in this film? How is it connected to the narrative? Okay. So your questions are your starting point. Always your questions are your starting point. And your questions have to be clear. They have to be focused. So it's not that I think about food and immediately I jump to something else like clothing, or immediately I think to something else. No, I have to be focused and I have to be concise. Let me not bring in too many questions into one question and confuse the listener or confuse the people who are going to look into my question. Okay. And most important, is that question researchable? Do you think it's worthy of being researched? That is where it becomes equally important as well. So, how do I find and understand whether it's clear, it's focused, it's concise, it's researchable? Okay. So, that is where the starting point of research comes into play. From there, we go on to formulating the research problem. Now, whenever we talk about a word called as research problem, please keep in mind, it is not a problem like how you say my hand is aching or my leg is paining or I have a severe toothache. It's not that kind of a problem. It's a situation. It's a condition that you observe. It is a kind of, a context in where certain things are happening in a particular manner. You want to know more about it. So what to find out about? So that is what the research problem tells you. So when somebody says, please read my research paper, the first thing in your research paper should be your research problem, where you have given them an introduction, a background to the study, establishing why the study becomes important, as to what is it that I'm studying and why is it that this becomes important for the study. And in your research problem, we normally in humanities and social sciences, we deal with what we call the 4 Ps, okay? The 4 Ps. Your research problem can be about people. It can be about people. Like, for instance, when you read American literature or any of those, why is it that Afro-Americans are presented in this particular manner? Okay. Now, or when you read a novel like Sons and Lovers, D.H. Lawrence Sons and Lovers, what about the mother-son relationship within that? Okay. Now, why those kind of associations? So you are thinking about people. You're thinking about people, you're thinking about certain situations where people are trapped in, what kind of problems they encounter, what kind of situation they are facing, or what about their actions or thoughts, all of those. Second P can be a problem that you are facing. Now, I'll give you a simple example. Okay, this is a very experiential kind of an example that I'm giving you. As you all know, we have something called as general English, which is offered in all the colleges, right? All the colleges, apart from your core papers. So likewise at Christ also, we have general English and we have additional English apart from our core courses, okay? So one particular semester, I taught in BA class, general English, okay? BA stream. Next semester, I was given general English for a science stream, a science group of students, okay? So what we realized was that the way I am teaching these things, I cannot teach that in the science stream, okay? And the way I teach grammar in BA, I cannot teach that over there. Because when I go to a BA class and I tell them these kind of grammar, immediately what they say is that, ma'am, let's go to the next one. We know this, ma'am. These are all basics. But when I go to the science stream, what I find over there is students are like, yes, can you make it a little bit more detailed? Can you explain it in this particular manner? And the strategy was different as well. So that is when, that was a kind of an understanding where I realized that some students were not opening up in the class as well because of the fear of speaking. So that was a problem. So how do I encounter that particular problem? How do I resolve that problem? That is when we thought, why not we introduce peer learning in the class? So what we did was that after I have dealt with the chapter, okay, after I have dealt with the chapter, I used to put them into groups. And I used to give them one question to each group and tell them, all of you have to contribute, write your answers on a sheet of paper, one sheet of paper for each group, and you submit to me. What I realized was that initially these people had problems in terms of opening up and speaking, but slowly they became comfortable with their own classmates and they started addressing that. So that was a way in which a particular problematic situation we were trying to encounter that particular one and resolve that as well. Similarly, I remember very clearly of a research scholar who said that the way grammar is taught in our 4th, 5th, and 6th grades is not appropriate because you have a way of coming and mouthing all the rules and regulations and asking them to by heart. Rather, teach them grammar through games. So that was something where he had seen a problem and he was trying to come up with a solution for it. Now, another one is program. Okay, program. I'm sure all of you have heard about the prime ministers, if you remember, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan and all of those. Okay, so that was a program which was put in place. So you want to understand the efficacy of that particular program. You want to understand, what were the kind of drawbacks or what was the success rate, all of those. That is about a particular program. Or, for instance, when we keep revamping our syllabus or floating a completely new syllabus altogether, we do this, we want to understand whether the program, all the papers have been very well received. Where did we find any kind of, glitches out there? How do we resolve all of those? So that is with regard to a program, maybe a government funded or any of those kind of programs as well. Last one is a phenomenon. Phenomenon, something that you have been seeing that happen in a particular manner across time. What immediately comes to my mind is years ago, years ago, there was in the newspaper one small write-up which said that, in Kerala, for the 10th and the 12th and all, normally in your school, marks, girls would be the toppers, but when it comes to competitive exams, boys would be scoring or would be stealing the limelight and all. And there was a small study which was trying to say why this phenomena was happening. Okay. Similarly, we were also observing that, in our postgraduate program, we have more number of girls joining than more number of boys. Okay. Why this particular kind of a trend? We wanted to know that. Okay. Is it something to do with the syllabus? Is it something to do with the basic kind of course or the market that it is addressing? What is it? So what is it that you have in mind? Similarly, if you have also seen about the civil service exams, the UPSC exams in our country, a certain state, where you have more number of people getting into these kind of higher positions, because right from the childhood, they are trained how to crack those and all of those. So what is the phenomenon that works out there? Okay. So you want to understand that. Now, all of these, it can be any of these 4 P's, it can be 2 of these P's linked together, any of these things. Okay. Now, in a research problem, what you have to finally do is that once you have said, okay, I have observed this situation in this particular text, and I want to know why. Okay. Now, I'll give you an example. For instance, let's say, always we have heard about children being used as innocent characters in novels and in films. Children are repositories of innocence. They exemplify what you call as, pliable, gentle minds and all of those. And in one particular film, I'm coming across a child who is projected as a villainous kind of character. So I want to know why so. Okay, that is where my research starts. So I'm saying I have been used to seeing stereotypes of children as epitomes of innocence. And then one fine day, I find that stereotype being deconstructed, and therefore I want to know, therefore, what happens. Okay. So I ask the question, so what? So state your research problem and then ask this question to yourself, so what? Am I still finding a possibility to answer that question? Then yes, definitely. That is a research problem that you want to go ahead with. I have stated the condition that I have observed. I want to know more about it. I'll give you another example. One of my postgraduate students, she is working on the actor Vijay Sethupathi. Have you all heard about him? Tamil actor Vijay Sethupathi?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So Vijay Sethupathi, if you have seen, he is a very flexible kind of an actor, somebody who has been handling, a lot of roles and all of that. But off screen, he projects a very mass kind of an image, very humble, very obliging, very down to earth kind of an image. So if you see that there, he is redefining the term mass for you. So then she came to me and she said, I want to study about him. So basically, he enjoys a star status, but at the same time, he is not projecting the kind of stardom that you normally think about the regular stars. So what is he trying to do there? Why is he trying to make this kind of a statement? Okay. So start thinking about those. So that is where, she started thinking about observing his on-screen persona and his off-screen life, how he participates in promotional events, how he gives interviews, how he's participating in, if I'm not mistaken, this one, Master Chef, I think Tamil, there is a program, right? So how is he conducting himself in that? All of those. So you have newer avenues coming up and understanding, why it is happening that way. Okay. I hope it's fine so far. And the pace at which, I'm normally known to speak, known for speaking very fast. Okay. My students keep telling me that, ma'am, your train has left the station while we are still waiting on the platform. So in case you find that, I'm going very fast, please feel free to let me know. Okay. Now, once you have stated your problem, what you require out there is that you need to know whether this problem can be researched. Okay. So you need to do a literature review. Now, what you do out there, once your background is there, you need to know, why is this important? Why do I need to study? So what you need to understand first is that you need to position your research. So for this student, I will use that as an example. She has positioned her research within film studies. She has positioned her research within stardom in film studies. So she has narrowed down further. And then what has she done? She has read up on what kind of research has been done about stardom. So then she came across a lot of theoreticians who have dealt with about stardom. They have theorized about stardom both in the West and in India. She narrowed down to Indian context. Now, in the Indian context, how stardom again worked. Now, again, she further narrowed down to Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu as a context, how does stardom work over there? Their stardom connected to politics and all of those, the larger than life kind of figure and all of those, how has that been done? So that is basically what research has been done and how much has been studied and how can you position. So intellectual progression as well. How much has been done and how do you take it forth? Now, literature review, normally I find people coming and saying it's a summary. Whatever has been done so far, it's a summary. Is it a summary? No. But is it not a summary? Yes, it is a summary as well. So what is it actually? It's a summary come a synthesis. It's both a summary come a synthesis. So to say more clearly, it is a critical summary that you are doing. So you basically need to say, what are the ideas that you are taking from other studies and you need to connect it to your study. How will your study take it forward? Or how will your study debate that? Okay. How will your study debate that particular idea? Or how will your study be extending it forward? You have to say that. So that is where interpretation comes and evaluating the source. Let's say somebody has said an idea. Now, for instance, I'll give you an example. This is again from film studies. I'm sorry, because these are research scholars who are working with me. So we have these discussions on and off. So I'm just pulling from that. Okay. So she was telling me about, ma'am, isn't cinema considered to reflect society? Isn't cinema considered to reflect society? That is how cinema has been always labeled. But if you look into it, cinema, as much as we say cinema reflects society, cinema also constructs a society within itself as well. Okay? In the sense, they can present society the way they think is appropriate. It need not be that it has to be completely in allegiance with what you see in society out there. So there again, you are saying that what somebody has said, that cinema is a faithful mirror of society, does not hold valid. So you contest that and you say that cannot be held in the context of my study. Cinema as clearly mirroring or reflecting society does not hold valid for my study. Therefore, you are contradicting what somebody else has said. Okay. Having said all of them, having evaluated all the sources that you have at hand, okay, having done all of that, you need to think in terms of the keywords. Now, for instance, for this scholar, I said, one of your keyword is stardom, second one is Indian cinema, third one is Tamil cinema, fourth one is Vijay Sethupathi. Think about all of these things and then narrow down your study. Okay. So what happened is that she then narrowed down further and further and she identified a gap. She identified a gap. Now, when you say a gap, please understand it is not a gap in your knowledge. It is a gap in what is there, out there for you. So many people have studied about Rajnikant, they have studied about MGR, they have studied about Kamal Hassan, then Vijay, all of them they have done. But studying about Vijay Sethupathi as kind of, redefining the mass hero kind of image has not been done. So that is a gap and her study is perfectly fitting into that particular gap. That also validates why her study is important. Are you clear? So that is where you are trying to say how this fits into what is already there, the existing repository of materials and how it is interpreting as well. Okay, just a second, please. So your literature review is giving you a sense of direction. It's positioning your study. It's helping you understand what has been done so far. So past is informing the present. You can't say my research is contemporary, therefore I will not refer to any sources. No. Like you would have always heard this dialogue, right? If you are referring to one particular source alone, it's considered as plagiarism. But if you are referring to more than one sources, it's considered as research. Okay. So you need to understand how you will evaluate the source as well. It is not to say that the source is good, source is bad, but how is that source going to help you in your study or not going to help you in your study? Is it going to be part of your study, not part of your study? That is where literature review comes handy. So this is precisely what I was talking about. You have formulated a problem, searching the relevant literature, analyzing, synthesizing, evaluating, and appraising the literature. So just basically the same thing that I have mentioned. Okay. Once you have done your literature review, you have understood, okay, fine, my topic can be studied. I can. Now understand one thing, literature review does not stop over there for your kind of study, humanities. It has to be woven again and again further into it. Okay. Once you have realized, okay, fine, I have a research problem, I have my questions clear, I have my literature review, which is backing my study. Now I need to tell my reader what my objective is, meaning what are the goals that I'm trying to achieve? What is it that I'm trying to understand? That is where your objectives come. And your objectives can be divided into main objectives. You have one main objective and you divide that into sub-objectives. That depends upon your convenience, whether you want just one clear statement or you want to further divide it the way you are comfortable. Now, what happens in an objective? Objective normally begins with an action verb. Please remember that, okay? It's basically you telling your reader, what am I going to do? So you will find your objectives as the objective of the study is to analyze, to interpret, to describe, to compare, to experiment, to solve, okay? To propose a solution. So always the to plus the verb, okay? That will be there in your objective. That is when it becomes an objective. You have to tell them what will you do. Okay. Objective is to. It's always like, addressing what will I do in future. And your objective must be clear. Don't beat around the bush. Concise, again, to the point. Declarative, meaning you are making a firm statement out there. My objective is to compare these two works to understand how the writers have dealt with the theme of death. Two writers have dealt with the theme of death. So you want to understand that. Like, for instance, if I am taking Emily Dickinson and Edgar Allan Poe, now both of them have spoken about death. I want to compare them and understand how they have. Or Sylvia Plath and Emily Dickinson, two women writers from American literature, how they have dealt with the idea of death. I'm comparing because there is a commonality and I want to understand. Okay. And it also gives a sense of direction. Now, this is what I strongly advise all my researchers. Keep your objective right in front of you so that you don't keep digressing. You might start doing something. And you might be doing, let's say, a historical analysis. In between, you find your research completely moving towards what you call a gender analysis. Okay, gendered kind of reading. So your objective will bring you back. Hello, that is not your focus. Your focus is on a historical kind of reading. So you need to be focused, giving it a direction, and that is where an objective is. So you would have heard the acronym SMART, which is something which has been used with a lot of objectives very clearly. Okay, that means your objective has to be specific. M for measurable. That normally works within a quantitative study. A for what you call as achievable. You should be able. Now, don't take up an objective if your research is to write a dissertation within 4 months. Don't take up something which might involve 2 years time frame. It should be achievable. That's what you also say in terms of T as time bound, right? And this is something which you can do. Let's say you want to inquire about a tribe in Nagaland, but there is no possibility of you going or traveling there. Okay, then that's not achievable. If you can't get your hands onto those resources, it's not achievable. Then R is for relevant or reliable. You should know that, this is very, very relevant or immediately impinging on that particular study. And T, as I told you, is time bound. So those are things that you have to keep in mind, that I tell my objective clearly to my target group. What am I trying to study? People, I hope you are with me. Everybody, I hope you're with me and hope it's clear so far, the pace at which I'm going.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, miss.
Now, okay. Thank you. Please feel free to stop me if you have any doubts. Okay. Now, when we talk about research, we have basically two paradigms in research. One is what we call qualitative, and second one is what we call quantitative. I think the figure is here. The illustration itself very clearly establishes for you. Now, paradigm is a perspective or a thought process. You would have heard about people saying there has been a paradigm shift. Okay, there has been a paradigm shift from what we call as, saying that sciences and humanities are separate to integrating sciences and humanities together. So that's a complete drastic shift from what was held earlier to what it is right now. So qualitative means basically you're dealing with pictures, words, images, dialogues, all of those. Okay. Qualitative kind of data. Quantitative is where you are working with numbers, statistics, bar diagrams, pie diagrams, all of those, which are quantifiable, where you think in terms of how much. Okay. And here you're looking into what and why. Here you're thinking in terms of quantity. Here you're thinking in terms of what you call as, very qualitative kind of data, image kind of data, or words and all of those. Okay. You might also have a research where you might bring both of these. It need not be versus itself. It can be a quali-quanti data. Like for instance, you want to understand how the OTT platform is informing the new generation. Okay, you want to understand how it is changing the viewership. If you want to study that, you can also conduct a survey as much as you observe what is being done on OTT platforms. So a survey will involve you conducting, giving them questionnaire, getting answers, and doing the tabulation, all of those. So where it will involve some figures as well as some data that you have collected through observation as well. So understand qualitative and quantitative is not a kind of a methodology per se, it's a paradigm. It's a paradigm that you have in mind. So most often it's the type of data that you are dealing with. Is it qualitative data or is it quantitative data? That informs the nature of my study. That informs what I'm studying. Okay. So I have just brought this idea out here, what I have clearly told you right now itself. In humanities, you would work with creative works, diaries, letters, interviews, news footage. Sciences, you will have experiments, clinical trials, all of those. In social sciences, you can have both. You can have census data, you can have experiments of human behavior, all of those. Okay. So that is something which you can have, mixed sources as well. So keep that in mind. Okay. I hope you know what you mean by primary research and secondary research. Primary research is the first-hand resource that you are getting. Like if you want to study, let's say you want to study Thomas Hardy's Far from the Madding Crowd. So that particular novel becomes your primary source. Articles written on Thomas Hardy's Far from the Madding Crowd becomes your secondary source. Okay. So keep that in mind. In my study, I will have the primary and the secondary sources. Now, this is the most important thing because in every presentation, we keep asking, what is the methodology or what is the research design? What is the framework through which you're going to study your entire research? So you have a set of ideas and based on which you're going to conduct your study. Okay. So your study can be, I have listed a few pertinent ones out here. There are more definitely, but I will just give you an insight into a few which are extremely important. One is what we call as historical. Okay. You are doing a historical research where you are tracing how this particular, let's say, historical research to understand madness. Okay. How madness has evolved across time, a historical kind of research. You fix a time period and you are doing that. Second one can be a very comparative kind of an understanding, as I told you about Emily Dickinson and Sylvia Plath. But in comparison, you should have a common ground. There should be a common ground based on which you're comparing. You can't randomly compare. Just because, I am given two writers, let me compare. That becomes just a fashionable, a fashion statement that you are doing out there. It's not something which you are doing with that clarity. It can be descriptive. You are just describing a particular phenomenon, or you are describing something that's happening. Like, for instance, now the pandemic and way online is opening new avenues of learning and research, all of those. So that can be a descriptive research. You are just describing what has happened. So people understand that very clearly. Phenomenological. Phenomenological research, meaning you're talking about the lived experience. Okay, lived experience. Now, who is that famous? I'm so sorry, his name I can't recollect right now. The man who runs so fast. Uh, oh my God, I keep forgetting the tall person.
Usain Bolt.
Yes, Hussein Bolt. Yes. Now, how is it that, over he is consistently able to maintain that way? You want to know about his lived experience. So you start talking to him, you start asking him about his experiences, his lived experience in terms of failures that he has encountered. How has he overcome all of those? Or somebody who has been a topper across time period. You are asking them how it has been to be successful across time. Okay. I'm so sorry, Sebo. I haven't been keeping note of the time. Uh, so, what is to be done?
Yeah, yeah, you can continue a bit more and we'll go for interaction after that. It's
Okay,
okay.
okay. Oh, yes. Okay. Then another one is ethnographic kind of methodology. When you say ethnographic methodology, you're basically writing a culture. You find a new particular group, or let's say a group of people who are living, who follow certain practices, they have certain beliefs, they follow certain traditions, customs, and conventions. You go and you interact with them, look at what kind of rituals they observe, write about their culture, interview them, look at their records, their annals, all of those. You're documenting. You're documenting culture. That is ethnographic study. But in an ethnographic study, what you need to do is that you need to communicate your findings to them. It is not enough that you just observe them, take down data, come and present, and you go. A good researcher is somebody who goes back and communicates. Now, I remember lots of years back, one of my students, as part of her culture studies research, she was staying in Kozhencherry. Okay. So she said, ma'am, there is a particular community, a tribe near my place, and they have certain different kind of practices which I wish to observe, especially with regard to their marriage rituals. So I said, please go ahead, please go and study. So she went there, she interviewed them, she took pictures, she observed everything, all of those, and she came back and she did her inferences. I said, please talk to them and tell them that this is what you are inferring or your final conclusion. She went and told that to them, and they were happy with most of her readings, except for one or two. They said, no, this is not why we are reading it this way, why we are observing this way. But if you think so, that is your interpretation, but this is not what we believe in. So she, in her final submission, she put across their ideas, but she also said why she holds on to a particular idea based on her inferences or her understanding. Cultural. Cultural can be you're studying about the food habits or the dress or the what you call as certain practices that you follow, certain thought process, how rock and roll or blues is considered as a counter kind of an ideology, all of those. Or like, for instance, I'll give you an example. We have this fest and fair and all happening in our campus, right? So I used to teach American literature. I mean, I still teach American literature, I'm sorry. So when I teach American literature, we talk about Native Americans, we talk about totem poles and all of those. I'm sure all of you are familiar with that. So one day, when I was coming out from my class, I saw these stalls being set up, okay, by the hotel management students over there. And in front of their stalls, where they were, setting up their counters for selling food and all of that, they have put these two totem poles. And these are from Native American context. Immediately I thought, what does the totem pole communicate in that particular stall? What reference does it make? What kind of meaning does it bring over there? Okay, so that was something which I wanted to know. That's a cultural appropriation. So what happens when a totem pole is brought out there, out of its context and brought into a context? Or why do people have certain eating habits, certain clothing habits, certain practices, all of those, certain rituals, all of those. Okay. So cultural can be an attitude, a way of life, anything. Okay. Next one is you can do an action research. So you need to have a research design, how you're going to go about once you have your question all ready. Now you have observed a problem that, the way grammar is taught in the sixth standard is not making much of an impact. Students are just by hearting, rote learning. Okay. That's a problem that you observe. Now you want to propose a solution. So what do? You go to that school, take permission, you conduct an entry level test. Okay, let's see. Let's imagine, let's say the teacher is teaching them subject verb agreement. Okay, first you conduct an entry level test based on what they have learned and you get the scores. Then you introduce a new method of teaching them subject verb agreement through games or something new strategy. Okay, after you have taught all of that, you conduct an exit level test, and you observe the scores. Has there been a change? Then your plan has been successful. So action means implementing it, observing whether it has been good or not. What are the consequences? All of those. That is action research. Okay. Feminist study, basically understanding, how women are positioned, the gender equations, the power paradigms. You want to read into all of those. Okay. The gendering that you are looking into. Post-colonial in terms of what you call the erstwhile colonized states and looking into how the literature becomes what you call, representative of that voice of resistance, or is it a voice of assimilation? How do we look into it? The process of what you call adapting and being adept in something. How do you look into all of these? So the post-colonial framework through which you are studying, like in Tempest, you have the character called Caliban. Now, through a post-colonial lens, you study what you call the Caliban complex, right? So that's a completely post-colonial approach. Otherwise, Caliban was seen as a marginal character who was tamed by Prospero, Ferdinand, Miranda. I'm sure all of you have heard about Shakespeare's, those prominent characters. Now we talk about something called as the Caliban complex. So a post-colonial approach where you are looking into it. Eco-criticism. I myself, I remember where in our college at institute, I'm sure, Febu would also remember that, how we were taught that, as a paper itself, eco-aesthetics and eco-criticism, where we were taught, how in a novel like God of Small Things, you can read into how nature works in terms of, the man relationship, the man-woman relationship, the bonding, how nature works in that particular context and all of those. Okay. Now, I have also extended this further, like, have you all seen the film Tuvana Tumbigal? Padmarajan is my favorite, one of my favorite directors.
Yes, miss.
Yeah, okay. So in Tuvana Tumbigal, I'm sure all of you remember every time when he writes a letter to Clara, there is rain happening there, or he's calling her, there is rain in the backdrop. So how does nature and man interact out there? All of those, you are looking into different kinds of associations. Archival. We have a lot of archives, right? We have archival societies and all of those. How from those archives you are able to cull out data, look into what you have to understand further, why certain things are not gelling well, how that can lead to further questions for which you need answers, all of those. So archival research is becoming very important. Don't think archival is only for history. Even literature students do that because you are talking about blurring of boundaries. So archival research becomes very, very important. Narrative. As I told you, why is a particular novel narrated in the first person singular? What does it communicate? Why are these events arranged in this particular manner? Now, I remember teaching a short story in my class which started with, and they lived happily ever after, and ended with the line, once upon a time. So we are used to reading stories which start with, once upon a time there lived a king and a queen, and the story ends with, and they lived happily ever after. So this was completely a reversal of what we had seen all that way. Okay. So why that kind of a study? Exploratory. Now, a particular trend is happening, a particular kind of a trend is happening in the field of fashion. Why is this happening this way? What is it all about? You want to explore more about it. Okay. Now, what is the kind of way in which the influences are shaping this particular trend? How are they taking it forward? You are just exploring it. Last one I have put forth. There are more. Okay, as I told you, postmodern, lots of other approaches, but I have listed a few over here. Film and film culture. You want to study about certain specific text, certain specific text. Like, for instance, I'm sure all of you remember about Suresh Gobi's films, action kind of films. So you want to study how he projects a certain kind of an action hero through his films. Okay, that's about specific film text. Film culture. You want to know about the way in which the film industry functions, the organizations like amma, WCC, all of these function, or what you call as different bodies out there, different lobbies of power. What is the on-screen, off-screen relations? All of these. Stardom on screen, off screen, you want to study. Film culture can bring all of that. Production, distribution, consumption. How do people receive a film in a theater, in their laptop, on an OTT platform, in the small screen, in their mobile phones? You want to study all of those. So film culture extends it to larger domains of production, consumption, and distribution, and all of those. So these are a few research designs which I have put over here for you. Okay. I understand the paucity of time. So I'll just wind up with this, though I have a lot more to discuss with you. But I will wind up with this. Okay. Now, basically, what happens, please keep in mind, in your methodology, you are either dealing with any of these in your qualitative research. You are either dealing with certain experiences which make meanings to you, or you're talking about communication, how something is being communicated, or cultural understandings, as I told you, certain practices or methods or thought process, or a theory which has been put in place. Like, for instance, I remember feminism at a point of time spoke about an idea that all women are exploited. Okay. Now, of late, I'm sure in the past couple of over a decade or so, you have been talking about the idea that women are exploited, but each woman's experience of exploitation is different. You cannot talk about what you call a homogeneous kind of understanding. So ethnographic phenomenology grounded theory means you are formulating a new theory through your research. I have a research scholar who used to come and tell me, years back, he used to come and tell me, ma'am, at least one theory should be mine. In the world of so-and-so, one theory should be mine. So his inspiration was from the film Mani Chitratal. So he used to keep saying this, Oru Prabandham Endal. So he used to keep doing that. So that is where you're formulating a theory. So understand your methodology encompasses any of these, either experience or a cultural understanding or a communication or a framing of theory or a mingling of these two, any of these. Okay. I feel, there is, one second. Yes. So I have quite a bit more because I have reached only the 12th slide. I have around some 11 more slides, and time is the only factor. So if you have any questions so far, I'm happy to take it up right now. And then if I can meet you at some point of time later or something like that, we can then think of that, because I will stop this over here.
Madam, I have a small question.
Yes, please go.
In your topic, I saw humanities can only be analyzed through qualitative methodology. I saw that in your point. Is that the only way to analyze humanities concepts? I don't think,
No.
because
That's why
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because in some literary works, we can apply quantitative analysis too. Like in Da Vinci Code, we can see both quantitative and qualitative analysis can be seen in those works. His work, in Dan Brown's work. Like Fibonacci, he tries to implement Fibonacci sequence and also Last Supper. So I have a small doubt, is that the only way?
Okay. In that slide, if you remember, when I was talking about the research paradigms, I said qualitative, quantitative, and mixed approaches. You do have mixed approaches. So one is what I said, I gave one example about the survey part. Now, to take this similar example, which you have quoted from Da Vinci Code, We ourselves, I remember one research paper that we did where we brought in the quality, and in the sense, studying the narrative as well as how science is brought into it. Okay. So what we did was that we did a research whereby we brought in concepts from literature as well as we brought in certain scientific principles as well, for which we referred to the science department, and a faculty from there helped us in terms of certain theories which you use in the field of science. And that was brought in together, and then the study was done. So you do have mixed approaches. That's why I had put there as mixed approach. Quality study is also possible. You can have survey along with interpretative data, all of those. So all of that is possible as well. That is definitely there. You're absolutely right.
Other participants can actually ask questions,
Okay. I
share your
think
observation.
there is one from Miss Pooja, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, you can use two methodologies. Like, for instance, let's say you are doing a study of, let's say, a novel in which you want to use both, let's say, a semiotic study. You want to do a semiotic study together with a gendered approach. You can do that. Or in films, you want to do a post-colonial along with what we call as, let's say, the bringing in the film and film culture along with that. You can use two methodologies, but your methodology must stem from your research. That's very important, because that is one thing which I forgot to mention. If I may use this platform to just say that as well. Okay. One important observation is I often find students coming and saying, ma'am, I want to do a post-colonial study. Do not start with a theory. Do not start with a theory. Start with an idea. Understand what all you want to explore in that idea and why that idea requires a particular theory. So it is not like you have a theory and you force fit your text into it. You need to have a text opening up a lot of questions, and for which you need an approach. Therefore, you use a theory. Otherwise, what happens is that we become comfortable with a lot of theories and we just want to apply. So, in fact, in my film studies classes, also, I tell them when you're watching the film, please don't start by thinking, okay, a lot of women in this films. Okay, like for instance, I was showing them the film World War. I said, just because you see women throughout, don't interpret, start using gender studies out there. First, watch the film, think about what is coming to your mind, what kind of questions for which you want an answer, think about the theory. So, methodology has to come from your study as well. Your study will lend itself to that. Okay.
Participants can either directly ask question or post their questions in the chat box.
Can we use a concept found in a text as a theory? Yes, of course, Thomas. Good morning. Of course, you can use that. See, sometimes what happens is that you might not have a very concrete theory as such. Like, for instance, that is something which I had in my later slides about what are the problems and possibilities. I could not do justice to that, problems and possibilities. Now, for instance, we have something called as oral narratives, right? Which are not written down. So for that, you cannot find a particular kind of a theory which is suitable for that. But you find a concept in a research paper which you think helps you understand that. For instance, there was somebody talking about oral narratives as offering a safe space for women to express their anguish in a particular culture. So that is when we came across a paper in which there was a concept called a secure space. Okay. Somebody had just used that. So we found that concept was very relevant and that could be used to study this oral narrative. You're using a concept from a text. That can be done. Sometimes you might not find your hard and fast theory, like how you talk about grand narratives. So therefore you are using that. That can be done. But always the text should demand a theory to be used. It is not that the theory is brought upon the text. Hope I have answered your question.
Um, Rajesh, if you have time, maybe we can have a few more of your slides and a presentation of them if you have time.
Okay, okay. Maybe another 5 more minutes or so.
Yeah,
5 to 10 minutes.
yeah,
Okay,
sure.
okay. I hope the people out here are not uh,
Yeah, there's a question.
tired. I hope.
No.
Okay, okay. Yeah, Vinita has a question. Why is there so much insistence on rules and regulations about font size, layout, punctuation when it comes to the final printed product? Okay. Yes, Vinita. That is one thing is because we talk about the font size and all of those more in terms of uniformity. Okay. More in terms of uniformity. Because when we tell them, that use any kind of font size, there are people who tend to go for a very minute kind of a font size where we have to use the microscope to decipher. And some people who want to buy page and they might insist on that layout, research paper. So basically, it's about standardization. That's why you have MLA or APA style sheet. It's more about standardization that you are trying to do out there. So standardizing and ensuring that everything there is a precision to it. Okay. Punctuation, all of this, because it's an academic research, you want to bring in that kind of a rigor as well. But the same research paper, when you publish it in a journal, when you publish it in a journal, you will find people what do you call writing based on what the journal wants. Okay. I will give you an example for that. When I was writing for two journal articles, the first journal article, they were comfortable with the style that I wrote, except for a few suggestions here and there, which they wanted me to clarify. Second journal article, they have been giving me n number of suggestions. They have been telling me we want subsections, we want an introduction, we want a literature review. I was like, am I writing a college research paper or am I writing for a journal article? But this is how they position it. So that is basically the standardization, more in terms of standardization or in terms of uniformity for a particular format. When you also have that, for submitting to an external. So St. Thomas College would have certain rules. At our college, at one point of time, printing on one side. Now it is printing on both sides is mandatory. And Times New Roman 12. Okay. So every institution follows that. Basically what I have understood is in terms of standardization or uniformity. Okay. Can a study on historical
Thank
be
you, ma'am.
archival? Yes. Yes, Vinita.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, most welcome. Aparna's one more question, and then I'll go to a slides for a few more minutes. Historical objects by archival criticism like Aranmula Kannadi. Yes, you can do that. See, for instance, you want to understand the cultural underpinnings. Okay, how that particular practice is still kept alive, or what are the ways in which it impinges on a cultural kind of commodification. If you look into it with what do you call capitalism coming in, how this Aramula Kannadi itself has become commodified. Okay, you can study that. You can study that. So with archival criticism as well, you can bring in the historical objects. You can look into how archives have functioned along with interviews. You can mix in two approaches, and that can be studied as well. Okay. For instance, there was a study on the what do you call is commodification of our art form, Kathakali. What has happened is that it was something which was performed in temples at a particular time to document a particular kind of cultural aspect. Okay. So when that particular thing was done, now if you see for tourism, don't you have capsule versions of Kathakali? So how are we looking into it? That can also be studied. What happens to it? Therefore, what are the kind of economics associated with it? All of those. Okay. Can we mix up cultural and political aspects with feminism? It depends upon your questions. Okay, it depends upon your question. I wish to do PhD in autobiographies by Indian Muslim women who speak about Muslims and Indian culture, the current political atmosphere, communal issues. From what framework can I study such an autobiography? Okay, you can study one with regard to narratology. You can study with that within narratology because autobiography is writing the self. Okay, writing the self. So when writing the self happens out there, what kind of way of writing, a particular kind of writing do you look into? Also in terms of If it is by Indian Muslim women, religion becomes an important aspect. Positioning in India, okay? You can also do in terms of what you call, there are people who have read from a very subaltern perspective. You can bring in feminism. So you need to see what are your questions, basically. Are you focusing on the form, or are you focusing on the content, or are you focusing on a particular ideology? So first frame your questions, Khalil, and once you have your questions in mind, you will know what to choose very clearly. So lay out your research problem, your objective. The objective of the study is is it a comparative study of 3 autobiographies? Why are we taking these 3 autobiographies? What is the reason for doing all of those? Likewise, and is it autobiographies by Indian Muslim women of a particular context, community, area? All of those you have to be clear. Okay, it can't be a random choice. Okay. Okay. Yeah, there are 2 more questions. So,
We have more
Febu, shall I
questions.
answer that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay. Is it possible to research on something which is not actually there in the text, but an interpretation from it? Interpret Mark Antony utilizing? Yes. See, you're reading between the lines, right, Kavya? You're reading between the lines. So you have to say why you are reading it that way. Okay. Research is not just a very, what you call, a hypothetical statement that you simply make out there. You have to say based on what cues from the text are you reading it? Okay, what cues from the text are lending itself for you to read it in that particular manner? And what is the contradiction that you can see in that? Okay, because Mark Antony is considered to be a faithful friend of Caesar, right? And when he comes over there and he delivers the famous, friends, Romans, countrymen, what is he actually trying to do out there? So you need to be very clear about why you are using that kind of an approach. That can be done, but a rationale is mandatory. Hope I have answered. Does a standard journals ask strictly for theories in the article? See, it depends upon that. There are certain journals which have got different kinds of articles. Like, for instance, you have reflections, where the article length is just for around 1,000 or 1,500 words. So that might be just your reflection on something. Then you have analytical kind of articles, okay, which will be for 3,000 or 4,500 words. Or deeper, what you call is theoretical based kind of approaches that they want for sure, which is for 6,000 to 8,000 words. So what you need is that you need to bring in a theory, weave it into your writing. In fact, I was about to do all of that a little later. What kind of theory, how the theory becomes part of it. For instance, there is an approach that we call jam-roly-poly approach, okay? Like your jam roll, your jam roll, right, Thomas? People, I'm sorry if you are hungry, jam roll, where you have jam and the cake woven into it, layer by layer. Any cross section you take, you get both the jam and the cake. So theory has to be woven that way. It's not theory separate and the text separate. Theory goes along with the text. That's how it has to be taken up. Okay. So you have to look at what journal. You have journals strictly for postgraduate students, for research scholars. Different kinds of journals are there. Then journals which are endorsed by UGC, then Scopus Index journals, Web of Science likewise. So first identify the journal, look at what kind of articles they publish, then see the kind of formatting that's available, all of those, then target a journal accordingly. Pooja, is it fine to take up a writer's work on which a research has not been done? If yes, will the review of literature become difficult? Okay, definitely, Pooja, you can do that. For instance, one of our students took up on a book which was published by our own student, okay, for her research. So there was no secondary source at all. But in her novel, she had spoken about specific ideas about a community, about cultural appropriation. So she used those concepts to understand. Review of literature was not difficult because that was positioned within Indian literatures, okay, Indian writing in English. So she could use those, how this study can be positioned within that, and how the writing has been taken forward. What are the concepts that it talks about? All of those. Okay, so that was taken forward as well. It can be done. Only thing is you might not find secondary source on that writer's work, but concepts that you are exploring, you will find sources which you can link into it. Okay, which can be very clearly linked to it.
Arjun, maybe we'll
Ah,
hold one more session for you. I mean, of your talk,
okay.
say another day, if you're
Okay.
willing,
Okay.
because we have demands coming like that,
Okay.
and maybe we have time constraints now.
Yes.
So you're also busy. So maybe we'll hold one more session of yours
Yeah, sure. I
another
think that
day, and
spoken
these
about,
participants can hear
yeah,
the further aspects.
yeah. You had mentioned about something on plagiarism, right? Because today I just mentioned plagiarism and I left it over there, Febu. So maybe I can
Yeah,
bring that in together and that I can do that some other time when the forum is active and students are also active, because right now it's a wonderful group. They are interacting well, very well. So
yeah,
quite happy to, respond to them. So some other time, definitely.